Mideast policy with Secretary of State John Kerry about to give a major speech at the State Department just days after the U.S. allowed a controversial anti-Israel resolution to pass in the UN Security Council. Good morning. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis in today for Jenna Lee. We are now awaiting Secretary of State Kerry's final policy speech on Middle East peace. He's expected to lay out the principles for a peace deal, and reaction already coming in, not surprising there, with the senior Israeli cabinet minister calling Mr. Kerry's planned address a pathetic step, accusing the Obama administration of trying to limit President-elect Trump's ability to set his own policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mr. Trump tweeting today, "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this. UN, stay strong. Israel, January 20th. Is fast approaching."
All this amid growing outrage over the recent UN Security Council resolution, which condemned Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where the U.S. ambassador broke with past practice and abstained from the vote, refusing to exercise America's veto power. That would have stopped the resolution in its tracks. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blames President Obama, even charging that the U.S. colluded with the Palestinians in drawing up the resolution, raising tensions even higher between the two leaders who have had, as you probably know, a strained relationship for years. Rich Edson is live for us at the State Department right now. What do we expect Secretary of State Kerry to say, Rich?
Now, good morning, John. And from Secretary of State John Kerry, we expect a defense of U.S. actions and a path forward for the Israelis and Palestinians on Middle East peace. However, there are questions to how significant that will be, given that the Secretary of State and the Obama administration have about 3 weeks remaining until they turn things over to the Trump folks, who have a very different view on foreign policy, and certainly foreign policy within the Middle East. The Obama administration has been, certainly over the last month, more critical of Israel's settlement building in a speech by Secretary of State John Kerry earlier this month, and then culminating on Friday in that UN Security Council vote where the U.S. abstained, but in doing so allowed that Israeli critical resolution to pass the council. The administration is making the case that its opposition and U.S. opposition to that settlement building is nothing new. In fact, the United States ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, after that vote on Friday, quoted Ronald Reagan saying that further settlement activity is in no way necessary for the security of Israel. The administration also points out that it's been critical of the Palestinians and critical of them, they say, for not condemning specific and being more critical of terrorist acts, John.
And what about the Israelis? What are they saying?
Well, the Israelis are saying the U.S. not only just abstained from this vote and allowed it to pass, they're saying that the U.S. orchestrated it, and that's something that the State Department denies.
We reject the notion that the United States was the driving force behind this resolution. That's just not true. The United States did not draft this resolution, nor did it put it forward. It was drafted, initially introduced, as we all know, by Egypt in coordination with the Palestinians and others.
The Obama administration is downplaying the consequences of this resolution, but there have been Republicans, the incoming Trump folks, and then on top of that, even Democrats who have been fairly critical of the Obama administration's actions on Friday. So we do expect the Secretary of State to explain those actions. That's supposed to be happening a short while from now. John?
We will have it. Thanks very much, Rich Edson at the State Department. Meantime, President Obama is coming under fire for his foreign policy, with a Washington Post editorial headline reading, "Thanks to no drama Obama, American leadership is gone." The author of that column, Richard Cohen, goes on to write, quote, "He is a 21st century man who never quite appreciated the lessons of the 20th. He has been all too happy to preside over the loss of American influence. Aleppo, Syria, now a pile of rubble, is where countless died, as did American influence. The Russians polished it off from the air, doing for the Syrian regime what the United States could not figure out how to do for the rebels. The city hemorrhaged civilian dead, and America, once the preeminent power in the region, did virtually nothing." Joining us now, John McCormack, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Do you agree with the overall theme of that column, that American influence in the Middle East died under the Obama administration?
I agree with that. I think any fair observer would have to agree with that Obama's legacy will be one of weakening our allies and leaving our enemies strengthened. Wherever you look, I think particularly in Syria and Iraq, we've learned that there are consequences. There's a price to be paid for non-intervention. Just as we may have learned that there's a price to be paid for intervention under Bush, we've learned that there really are costs to be paid when you don't intervene. So, for example, when President Obama decided he failed to secure an agreement to keep some U.S. troops to keep the peace in Iraq, we now see the consequence of that was the rise of ISIS. And Hillary Clinton herself has blamed the rise of ISIS also in part on the Obama administration's failure to arm the moderate rebels in Syria back in 2011 when they were less entangled with jihadists. Former Secretary Clinton said that left a huge vacuum, and that was now filled by jihadists. And Obama used their presence then not to intervene in 2013 when Bashar Assad crossed the red line and used chemical weapons. That in turn has led to real problems with our allies around the world. Not sure if America's going to be there to stand with them. Russia was emboldened. It invaded Ukraine. So anywhere you look around the world, I think people are beginning to learn that, just as with President Bush, there were a price to pay for intervention. There are real costs for Obama's decision not to intervene in a number of places.
But remember, one of the slogans that helped get Barack Obama reelected was that General Motors was alive and Osama bin Laden was dead. The projection was that this was a guy who went after our enemies in a muscular way.
Well, sure. He won got a lot of political capital for taking out Osama bin Laden under his leadership. But as we know now, Al Qaeda wasn't on the run. It was evolving. It was metastasizing into a jihadist army we now call ISIS that controls land in Syria and Iraq, and that's going to be a huge problem that the next administration is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, the current assessment from generals in the current administration are that it's at least 2 years away now. And again, you're saying that if the U.S. had left more troops in Iraq, it would have prevented the rise of this cancer.
Well, I think there's a good case to be made. I think that a lot of people who talk to foreign policy experts, generals, will say that a small force to stay behind, we could have easily prevented the rise of ISIS taking over a city like Mosul. I think that definitely would have been stopped if we had any U.S. forces there. Now it's been a long, bloody campaign to reverse the gains, and we have not yet defeated them. So I do think that that's again what we're seeing from the administration is in their undermining of Israel and the fact that they've been willing to coddle Russia and Iran. We've seen our enemies strengthened and our allies weakened.
There was that famous moment during the first debate on foreign policy between Mitt Romney and President Obama. Mitt Romney challenged him on Russia, and Mr. Obama, famously said the 1980s want their policy back. What do you say about the state of relations with Russia right now?
Well, I don't think you could really call the state of relations between the U.S. and Russia as anything more than a failure. President Obama and the State Department and Hillary Clinton thought they were going to pursue a policy of reset. We were going to get away from this sort of cowboy diplomacy that George W. Bush engaged in. And how has that worked out exactly? We have Russia went ahead and invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea. It's now in eastern Ukraine. It's playing a dominant role in Syria, slaughtering civilians. And it's been credibly accused of intervening and trying to sway the U.S. election by hacking Democratic emails. So I think that you have to say that on that diplomatic front, it's been a complete failure.
The President Bush obviously launched the war in Afghanistan and then the invasion of Iraq. President Obama seemed to feel that he was elected in large part to sort of withdraw from the world. You're saying that he overdid it?
I think so. I think that the American people would care more about securing the peace than whether he had fulfilled a campaign pledge to a T. I think that if he could have secured a follow-on force of 10,000 U.S. troops, that could have prevented any sort of large gains that ISIS secured in Iraq and Syria over the last 5 years.
John McCormack from the Weekly Standard. John, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are awaiting remarks from Secretary of State John Kerry on the Mideast peace process. We are going to bring you those remarks as soon as the Secretary steps up to that podium that you're looking at right there. Also, we're keeping a close eye on stocks today. Once again, as the Dow continues to hover around 20,000, What is holding it back from that milestone? Plus, as one part of the country digs out, another region braces for a big blast of winter. The latest forecast straight ahead.
Now across the Northeast, where a system is already bringing heavy snow and powerful winds up to 60 miles an hour. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean live from the Fox Extreme Weather Center. What is going on out there, JD?
It's winter, right?
Yes.
It's here. And we could be dealing, well, we are going to be dealing with a nor'easter tomorrow because low pressure is going to form off the coast and get a lot of energy from the Atlantic Ocean, and we could be dealing with feet of snow in New England. Current temperatures, this time yesterday, we were at 58 degrees, so quite a drop as this cold front moves through. Past 24 hours, quiet, but do not be deceived. We have this low pressure across the Great Lakes going to transfer all of its energy to this coastal low. So this time tomorrow, mainly a rain event, really southward of New York City, and then snow in the interior sections and northern New England. But along the coast, we think it's going to be too warm for a big snow event. However, northern New England, interior, northeast, you could get walloped by this storm system. It's going to be an all-day event tomorrow, maybe even into Friday. So there's the bullseye where we think upwards of over 18 inches possible, which is great news for the skiers. And the other good part of it is it's going to be out of here by Friday. So winter weather advisories posted for these areas that you see in the blues and the pinks. So be aware and make sure that you are checking with your local forecast. John and Melissa, back to you.
What about New Year's Eve? We got to know.
I'm happy you asked. Let's take a look at this. This time yesterday, we were talking about the possibility of maybe a few rain showers, but I was hoping that I could wave my magic wand and make sure that it was just cloudy skies, and it looks like it's going to happen. Temperatures around 38, which is great news because it could be a lot colder than that. The coldest New Year's was 1917 at 1, and the coldest wind chill back in 97 was minus 21. The warmest was 58, but I think 38 is not too bad. And across the rest of the country, oh, my apologies. There's the snowfall from the nor'easter. Do I have? Oh, here we go. Here's your midnight forecast for Baltimore and Milwaukee, Denver, Phoenix. Not too bad. Much of the country around seasonal. We could see some snow showers or rain showers across Seattle, as well as Atlanta and New Orleans. But here in New York City for the big celebration, I think the weather is going to cooperate. Back
Sounds
to you.
good.
Please.
A lot of the tourists will be very happy with that. Thank you, Jen.
I will take a bow.
All right, please do.
Maybe after. Okay.
All right. Stocks on Wall Street actually heading lower today as the Dow's flotation with 20,000 cools down a little bit. Take a look right now, down 16 points on the big board. Fox Business Network's Nicole Petalides is live at the New York Stock Exchange. And Nicole, I know I'm struggling with people asking me, when are we going to see 20? When are we going to see 20? I don't know. Do you know?
Well, I mean, we don't know exactly. I just asked two traders who walked by, and they both said Friday, if that's any crystal ball for you. The idea is that everybody came in today once again with hope in their hearts for Dow 20,000 because we've gotten oh so close. In fact, this morning we moved up 35 points, and we're within 20 points of Dow 20,000, but then since pulled back because we have energy and technology and industrials. So many of the sectors are under pressure today. I will say that there is a cautionary tone, and then I'm going to give you the good news at the end. JP Morgan put out a morning note today talking about the fate of the United States and the global markets overall, that it rests on the realization of the Trump-Ryan agenda, the anticipation and hope of the GOP platform. That does continue to underpin sentiment in a good way, right? Stocks, that's all good. But there does appear to be some differences that are occurring between investor expectations and the likely reality, and this represents equity risk going into 2017 for the first few months. So can Trump, Ryan, put these great ideas through on corporate taxes and infrastructure spending and the like? So there is some cautionary tone on that. I will say for this quarter, we've had some great performers. Goldman Sachs has helped to lift the Dow from 19,000 to 20,000. This last quarter, Goldman Sachs is up 50%. NVIDIA has been a winner on the S&P, also helping the NASDAQ moving to all-time highs, Bank of America, United Airlines, and also Netflix. But big picture here, the traders still feeling optimistic. They still think that the trend is to the upside. This is a headline-driven market. Anything Donald Trump says at any time can really give this market a boost. And the idea here is that the market will move to 20,000. And if you ask everybody here, they still feel bullish. I will also say that this week, and this is my last point, this week notably is a winning week because money managers that have some cash, they put it into the areas that look good, so that they're not sitting on cash for all their clients. They say, hey, I was invested in Goldman, I was invested in this, and they really get that in there by Friday. It's called window dressing, just to make it look good by the end of the year. And that, too, could give us a little bit of a boost by the end of this week. So we'll say hello to Dow 20,000, maybe.
That's right. That end-of-the-year window dressing, always critical. Nicole Petalides, thanks for bringing that to our attention. See you soon.
So we are waiting for Secretary of State John Kerry's speech on Mideast policy and plans for a peace deal. There's a live look at the podium in the State Department where he'll be making some significant remarks just moments from now. We will have them for you live. Why a former head of UN affairs at the State Department says the U.S. and the United Nations have no business outlining the parameters for an agreement, who he says should be involved. Plus, a new arrest to tell you about in the Berlin terror attack, what led investigators to this suspect. These waning days of the Obama administration, Secretary of State John Kerry making remarks about Mideast peace as tensions simmer between the U.S. and Israel. Let's listen in.
For one simple reason.
That it was intended to preserve the possibility of peace through a two-state solution.
The two-state solution is now in serious jeopardy. The truth is that trends on the ground, violence, terrorism, incitement, settlement expansion, and the seemingly endless occupation, they are combining to destroy hopes for peace on both sides and increasingly cementing an irreversible one-state reality that most people do not actually want.
Earlier today, the president-elect took to Twitter to blast the UN vote, accusing President Obama of disrespecting our longtime ally. Peter Doocy joins us live outside the Trump estate in Palm Beach, Florida. So, Peter, how badly does the president-elect think the Obama administration has damaged the U.S. relationship with Israel?
John, the president-elect doesn't think the United States and Israel are on friendly terms, at least not officially, for the next few weeks. So he did take to Twitter with a two-parter that says this: "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this, UN. Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching." January 20th, of course, Mr. Trump's inauguration day. That long message on social media did catch the attention of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose official Twitter account wrote back a grateful reply. It says, "President-elect Trump, thank you for your warm friendship and your clear-cut support for Israel." So the days of only communicating about sensitive diplomatic matters through secret back channels are completely gone. Now world leaders are talking to each other out in the open for everybody to see. John?
So the president-elect still at Mar-a-Lago behind you. What is he up to today, Peter?
We've been told that about 3 hours from right now, we need to be on standby for some sort of a positive economic announcement from the president-elect at Mar-a-Lago. We do not know exactly what that is because the transition team says they want to keep us guessing, but we will know before too long. We did find out this morning that the president-elect received the highly classified presidential daily briefing today, and he had a meeting with the head of the private equity firm, the Carlyle Group, David Rubenstein. He will also meet today with executives from a handful of America's best hospitals, including the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, and the Cleveland Clinic. And the Cleveland Clinic today at Mar-a-Lago is being represented by Dr. Toby Cosgrove, who officials have told us in the last few days is a leading contender to get the nomination for VA Secretary. John?
Peter Doocy, thank you. And just one note, we expect to be hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, his response to that lengthy John Kerry speech coming up about 45 minutes from now. We'll have it for you live. Melissa.
Joining us now is Brian Hook, former head of UN Affairs of the State Department, former Assistant Secretary of State under President George W. Bush. Well, Secretary Kerry really removed any sort of ambiguity about how the U.S. felt about this resolution or what their role was. I mean, it was a full-throated condemnation of Israel's settlement activity. Was that surprising to you at all?
He continues the Obama tradition of abandoning Israel. If you listen to that speech, John Kerry presented himself repeatedly as a friend to Israel, but with friends like him, who needs enemies? There's an old adage in politics that if you're explaining, you're losing. And Obama is doing a lot of explaining for abandoning Israel. And I think it's also important to take a step back and look at the Middle East today. Aleppo is burning. Iran is racing toward a nuclear weapon. You have the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And what is Obama spending the last 23 days of his presidency focused on? Israelis building houses. This is diplomatic malpractice, and Congress should step in.
Okay. So, I mean, he laid out the arguments as to why what Israel is doing stops a two-state solution from being possible and why that's the only real solution for peace. I mean, one thing that he said is that Israel is setting up settlements in places, you know, where it would obstruct the flow of people if you tried to have a two-state solution, that it's very deliberate exactly where they're building these homes, and that having a single state, you can't be a Jewish state and be democratic at the same time, that all those things violate U.S. principles. Take a shot at that. What's wrong with that argument?
The status of Jerusalem needs to be decided by the parties on the ground. It cannot be decided by the United Nations or by John Kerry or Barack Obama. John Kerry achieved the unique feat of alienating the Israelis and the Palestinians by meddling in the peace process. And throwing Israel to the wolves at the UN will do absolutely nothing to advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. The UN is the single worst forum in the world to resolve issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Why? What's a better forum?
A better forum would be the parties themselves working through these issues on their own without Obama and Kerry putting their thumb on the scale for the Palestinians.
The whole point of the UN, though, is that when parties can't do that. You know, I mean, this is an area that has been in dispute for a very long time, and it's not being resolved on its own. So the whole argument is to try and get together as a united group of nations to help foster a solution and foster a negotiation.
Such an organization would make sense if it didn't have such a long and ugly history of bias against Israel. It is not a level playing field. There have been more resolutions passed against Israel at the UN than resolutions against Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Russia combined. It's just a very bad forum to work through these issues. And if countries want to be helpful, they can do things behind the scenes. They certainly should stop trashing. The United States can stop trashing Israel as an ally. It's very important for the peace process for America to sort of be constructive. This role that they're playing is not constructive.
Yeah. All right. Brian Hook, thank you for your time. John.
Thank you.
Well, it appears relations with Israel will be radically different under a Trump administration than they have been under Barack Obama, who, of course, had hoped to hand the reins to his former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Many Democrats still blame outside forces for Clinton's loss, suggesting that Mr. Trump's voters made choices based on bigotry and hatred. But an interesting op-ed in the New York Times calls them out, saying Mr. Trump won despite his controversial comments, not because of them. That piece reads in part, quote, bluntly put, much of the white working class decided that Mr. Trump could be a jerk. Absent any other champion, they supported the jerk they thought was more on their side, that is, on the issues that most concerned them. Joining us now, the author of those words, David Paul Kuhn. He's a political analyst and author of The Neglected Voter, White Men and the Democratic Dilemma, and the political novel as well. What makes it worthy? David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you don't buy this idea that, I don't know, angry white voters put Donald Trump in the White House?
No, and in fact, what's so troubling about that it came from the former President Bill Clinton, was that it was very full circle. In 1994, Republicans barnstormed Congress, and this term, this trope, angry white male, was invented. From 1980 to 1994, it was used about 12 times in the mainstream media. In the year following the 1994 landslide, it was used over 1,500 times. And so to hear Bill Clinton now having to explain his wife's loss and citing anger, it's not only full circle, but it shows a lack of sympathy that the Democrats certainly extend to other groups.
Well, and she sort of suggested in that deplorables comment, I mean, she said half of Donald Trump's supporters fit in a basket of deplorables. So, and then she goes on to name racism and, you know, all kinds of isms. That suggests that a quarter of the voting public is you know, racist or homophobic or whatever.
So not only is that bad politics, but it's contrary to liberalism, right? So why were the Democrats so offended in 2012 by Mitt Romney's 47% comment? Why? Because it assumed the worst about Democrats. It said, we're giving gifts to Democrats, and that's why big government's giving gifts, and that's why they're voting Democratic. In the same way, Hillary Clinton's comments assumed the worst about Republicans. And for the Democratic Party, this is really a dangerous tendency. Every time there's the making of a Republican president, it's always assumed to be the worst in voters, whether it's fear or racism or sexism.
You've done quite a bit of picking apart of the voting patterns, the after polling, if you will. And you found some interesting things about, you know, people's attitudes about Donald Trump when it as regards women, for instance. They didn't necessarily like the things they heard about him. In fact, they deplored them, but they still voted for the guy in large part.
That's because they weren't voting for the most decent candidate. This is the point I try to make in the opinion piece. They were voting for the candidate they felt was their champion. And Democrats know very well what it's like to overlook faults in their champions as they practiced with Bill Clinton in the 1990s, when Democrats, and particularly feminists, overlooked Bill Clinton's controversial behavior with women and stood by their candidates, notably to the greatest extent during the Lewinsky scandal.
You point out in this piece, 1 in 5 voters did not have a particularly favorable view of either candidate, but you say if voters who disapproved of both candidates had divided evenly between them, Mrs. Clinton would have won. So again, they're overlooking something that they didn't like in Donald Trump to vote for.
Not only that, but these voters were actually disproportionately white males. And what's interesting about this is that here we have a swath of voters who clearly are estranged from both parties. But why did they vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump? Well, because he was the vote against the status quo, a status quo still not working out for them. And if the Democratic Party was closer to its roots in the FDR era, closer to its working class roots, then perhaps Hillary Clinton wouldn't have been in this position, nor the Democratic Party. And I think that the introspection that should catalyze from this outcome is just not seen in the Democratic Party since the election.
Obviously, Republicans were hugely disappointed when, you know, Mitt Romney lost and John McCain before him when Barack Obama won 2 consecutive turns. But I don't remember the kind of visceral anger that's being directed at Donald Trump. Is my memory that short, or do you see it the same way?
Well, you're right, but I don't want to let the candidate off. I'm defending the voters.
Okay.
Because I think it's objectively true that Donald Trump said controversial, and that's in some sense a gentle word, on many issues, controversial words, tweets, and he certainly antagonized the Democratic base on multiple occasions. But the key is you necessarily should not assume the worst in your opposition. In other words, just because you lost the election, it doesn't mean you lost it because your opposition was voting for the worst attributes of their belief system. In other words, they didn't get the best of you because of the worst in them. And I think both parties do this, and unfortunately, the Democratic Party is doing this now. And often, I would say, liberal elites don't realize they're punching down. They think they're punching up when they're attacking the white working class, but they're actually punching down. And I think that they should consider that notion.
Democrats didn't lose because voters are bigoted. That sums it up.
Indeed.
All right, David Paul Kuhn, thank you.
Thank you.
Heather.
So chaos at the mall as 200 young people form a flash mob in the latest violent incident, like it across the country. Now several people are facing charges. Plus, for more than a year, Russia has denied allegations of widespread doping of the Olympic athletes. Not anymore. Sports officials finally speaking out about what they admit is a, quote, institutional conspiracy.
Right now, Russia is actually backtracking on an earlier admission of widespread doping of its Olympic athletes. In an interview with the New York Times, the acting director of Russia's anti-doping agency called it an institutional conspiracy, the Russian doping. Officials now claim she was misquoted, but the Times is standing by its story and the quotes therein. Let's talk about it with Christopher Swift, the Georgetown University National Security Studies adjunct professor. Jared Max is sports reporter for Fox News Headlines 24/7 on Sirius XM Radio. You know, I wanted to open this segment with the startling, to me, admission from the Russians that they finally say, yes, we were doping, Jared, but now they're saying, well, we didn't exactly mean what we said.
For what it's worth, the New York Times reporter who took all these quotes did go to Twitter today and say all of the quotes in this story are accurate. I don't find it surprising that all of a sudden that there's some backtracking saying, oh, well, we didn't exactly mean that, and there should not be any possible connection to the Russian state sponsoring any of this doping. It's no surprise that they've backpedaled on this big statement today.
Well, what surprised me, Christopher, is that they ever came out with a statement admitting it in the first place. I mean, one would think that, that this acting head of the anti-doping agency might be in fear of her job or something worse.
That's a good assumption, John. Look, it's not surprising in one sense. There is a ruling from, or an investigation from the World Anti-Doping Agency has pretty much laid out the facts here. The facts really aren't in dispute unless you happen to work at the press office at the Kremlin. And I think part of what we're seeing here is something that we see in Russian politics quite frequently. That is, the leadership is presented with a factual determination based on, science and investigations and all the like. And then it gets into the realm of advisors closest to Vladimir Putin, and immediately it's denied because of a possible connection to the highest levels in Russia. And that's a difficulty that, we have in the media, and it's a difficulty that ordinary Russians live with, trying to distinguish between the facts that are true and the facts that are right.
What does it say, Jared, about, the medals that have been won by Russian athletes in the Sochi Olympics and in other competitions? It just sounds like they have been doping their athletes summer and winter for years.
There's over 1,000 names who are implicated between 2011 and 2015. This is said to have been a program that was to be perfected by the Sochi Games. Started in 2012 at London, the 2013 Worlds in Moscow, then eventually 2014 in Sochi. What does it say, just from the layman, that there's probably a lot of cheating going on, that 33 medals that Russia won at the Sochi Games, the most of any country, well, how many of them are in doubt? How many of the 13 gold medals were legitimate? And John, for what it's worth, even let's look here in the United States. Did we take away any of Barry Bonds' home runs? Did we take away Mark McGwire's home runs? No, they're still in the record books. Just like when the NCAA penalizes a school and vacates wins, it's not like it never happened. As sports fans, it's almost like we say, all right, well, we saw the accomplishment. I guess they cheated, but whatever.
Well, Christopher, what's the bigger picture? I mean, people might kind of shrug it off and say, okay, so the Russians dope up their athletes. It doesn't mean that they are a bad actor when it comes to international affairs, or does it?
Well, it's symptomatic of a broader problem. And look, the Russians aren't the only ones that have this problem. Certainly the Chinese government has been accused of doing similar things. And when you look at independent sports federations in the West, be it professional baseball, be it the Tour de France, there's certainly plenty of doping to go around. But in the case of Russia, what makes this symptomatic is the desire to win, even at the cost of the truth. And that's kind of dangerous when you sort of get rid of all the other constraints on power in society. The things we take for granted in the West, the ability to have a conversation, conduct an independent investigation, let facts lead us to reasonable conclusions, don't necessarily play out the same way in Russia. That's very disturbing for Russia's conduct internationally, and it's very disconcerting for ordinary Russians, including the athletes that might be playing the game by the rules, but nonetheless discredited by virtue of their association with rule breakers.
So standards should apply to governments really equally. That's part of the lesson.
Facts and standards matter, and that's a lesson that everybody can take to heart.
Christopher Swift, Jared Max, thanks to both of you.
Thank you, John.
So new fallout from Secretary of State Kerry's Mideast policy speech. where he laid out the Obama administration's vision for peace and questioned Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's commitment to a two-state solution. But our next guest says the speech focused too much on the settlement issue, not enough on other key sticking points. What that issue is. Also, new developments in the investigation into the deadly Berlin terror attack at a Christmas market. Who was just detained and why police were looking for him.
The Berlin terror attack, with prosecutors saying the 40-year-old Tunisian man just detained today may be linked to Anis Amri. Amri is believed to have driven that truck into the crowded Christmas market last week, killing 12 and injuring dozens more. Amri was killed just days after the attack in a shootout with Italian police. And the new suspect was first questioned after his phone number was found in Amri's cell phone.
Fox News alert for you right now on our top story. Secretary of State John Kerry's final Mideast policy speech, where he defended the U.S. refusal to block the UN's anti-Israel resolution, while he laid out the Obama administration's vision for peace, which includes a two-state solution, calling on Israel not to reject that.
Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both. And it won't ever really be at peace. Moreover, the Palestinians will never fully realize their vast potential in a homeland of their own with a one-state solution.
Joining us now, Ami Horowitz, Director, UNME, and a contributor to FoxNews.com. So that statement right there that we just heard is the one that really jumped out at me, where he said Israel cannot be a Jewish state and a democracy at the same time, that those things are mutually exclusive. He talked about the fact that Israel was the one that was jeopardizing its own security by venturing out farther with these settlements and fanning the flames of hatred. Very harsh words there. What's your reaction?
Yeah, very harsh. I think it's so ironic that we had both this speech in particular and the resolution, during Hanukkah, when the Jewish people were trying to get self-determination in face against the Roman Empire. I think it's interesting, it's ironic, and it's extraordinarily problematic. First of all, he kept peddling in these demonstrable falsehoods about the essence of the conflict. He spent 45 minutes talking about the settlements. He spent 45 seconds talking about terrorism, talking about incitement in Palestinian textbooks, hatred against Israel. And the fact that the settlements are the obstacle is absurd. Israel has taken down settlements.
Address that point that he said, though, that they're provocative. I mean, that is true, yes?
I mean, in the eyes of the Palestinians, they may be provocative, but he kept talking about these like far-flung settlements, right? Yeah, right. You're talking about a truck with some people living inside. Things that can be taken down within, which have been taken down in the past. I mean, it's ludicrous. He kept the vast majority of all the growth of the settlements have happened in the areas which are clearly going to be within Israeli territory and have all been natural growth. These are not Israelis coming in, being busted and shipped into the territories. These are birth rates going on in areas which are going to be settled as part of Israel. It's ludicrous.
But his point, and again, I'm just arguing his side to hear your opinion on it. He's saying that they're purposely put up in places that obstruct the free flow of people, that make it so that the country cannot be divided into two states by virtue of where these parcels are, that is the design. Is that true?
Absolutely not. In fact, he talked about this notion of no free movement. Right. Palestinians within the West Bank. Well, I've traveled hundreds of miles throughout the West Bank, and going from city to city, there are no roadblocks or obstacles for getting to city to city. It's a falsehood. It's not true. Are there settlements in those areas? Sure, but if Israel wanted to have a two-state solution, which they've offered time and time again, and the Palestinians have rejected it, they can easily dismantle these settlements. They've done it in the Sinai. They've done it in Gaza. These are not obstacles to peace. Obstacles to peace are terrorism and the incitement of the Palestinian government.
Let's talk about their bottom line. The two-state solution is the only path forward for peace. We have heard that time and again from the Obama administration. We heard Kerry say that repeatedly there. Is that true in your mind?
Yeah, I think ultimately that you're not going to have, my personal opinion, you're not going to have a real settled peace without a Palestinian state sitting side by side peacefully with an Israeli Jewish state. That much I absolutely agree. But the reality is Israel has offered the Palestinians a state over and over again. And every time that offer's been made, all they got was terrorism and intifada. So the question then becomes, Do they want their own state? That's the real question we should be asking, is do the Palestinians truly want their own state within the area that Kerry has defined? I'm not sure the answer is yes.
Yeah, a lot more to ponder here. Wish we had more time. Thank you.
Pleasure.
John.
Well, Republicans will be in the driver's seat in the coming year, giving them a real chance to repeal and replace Obamacare. One editorial, though, claims their window of opportunity could close if they do not act quickly. Also, the sudden death of actress Carrie Fisher shines a light on a silent killer. Dr. Kevin Campbell joins us to talk about heart disease and how you can prevent it.
President-elect Trump and a Republican-led Congress ready to hit the ground running with several priorities, repealing and replacing Obamacare among them. Clock may be ticking to get the job done. An editorial from the Wall Street Journal highlights the importance of taking quick action, in part reading, quote, "If Republicans don't repeal Obamacare immediately, the danger is that the natural inertia of Congress takes over and nothing changes. But the more time they put between repeal and replace, the more the danger will grow." Joining me now to discuss this is David Avella, chairman of GOPAC, and Ethan Behrman, a radio talk show host based in LA. Thanks to both of you for joining us. David, that is the danger. I mean, Donald Trump described it as one motion, repeal and replace. Much easier said than done, but how essential do you think it is that there isn't a time gap in there?
It's essential. The political risk of doing nothing is far greater. And that starts with making sure, as the op-ed pointed out, that Tom Price gets nominated, or he has been nominated, gets put in place as the HHS secretary. Because no matter what laws Congress pass, you need a secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services that knows how to implement the laws, which we've seen from this current administration. They can't do that. They couldn't even get a website up for people to be able to sign up for the insurance plans they put in place.
Yeah. Ethan, I mean, it would be a political dream come true for Democrats to see the repeal and then a long time go by because, you know, people will understandably be frustrated. They will blame the party in power. And it goes to reason that Democrats are going to do everything they can to sort of say no, 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 and make this difficult for their own self-interest. Wouldn't that be the smart move?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would be telling the Democratic leadership. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. The no-Obama party of the last 8 years, the Republicans, the Democrats should tear the page out of their playbook and just say no to everything and let the Republicans have to live or die by what they are or are not able to accomplish. I mean, it really is that simple.
Yeah, David, that doesn't really work out that well, though, for the party saying no, no, no. I mean, it can if there's total disaster, I guess, but it looks like you're just an obstructionist, you're just, you know, roadblock, you're trying to make the country a mess for your own political advance. I don't know that that was the key to success for Republicans.
The 10 Democratic U.S. senators who sit in states that were won by Donald Trump are looking for ways to be helpful to this new administration and to find ideas that they can support. In fact, there have already been media reports where there are Democrats open to replacements for Obamacare and trying to find solutions that actually allow people to get insurance, which they're not taking now through Obamacare, to somehow get rid of the taxes that Obamacare has put in place. And they're looking to find some way to handle the doctor shortage that this country now faces because as reimbursement rates have gone down and fewer men and women are becoming doctors, it's going to be harder for patients to get the health care they need.
No, for sure. I mean, the path forward, as the trajectory, I should say, is very clear, Ethan. And we've seen the system didn't work before. You can see the flaws with the way Obamacare has been working where they need to be fixed. Obviously, the solution isn't simple, but we have so much data. If Democrats worked with Republicans and the solution worked, couldn't they say that they're part of, look, I voted for this and this thing's working and I was helping when others were sitting on the sideline and saying, you know, let you go down the drain so that I could have a political victory. No, I was trying to fix it. That would be a good, strong point for Democrats, no?
It would, and I just want to throw in here, I signed my own family up for Covered California, the California version of Obamacare. It was a horrible experience. It's a disaster here. There's no question that something has to happen. But I don't think either party has it right. Why are we so focused on insurance? Why aren't we focused on connecting people with their doctors again and getting the insurance companies out of the middle of it? That's part of the reason that we're closing in on 20% of our GDP going to healthcare, is we're focused on the wrong things with our ag policy. We're focused on the wrong things by putting the insurance companies in the middle of everything.
I mean, David, praise the Lord. I mean, that makes all kinds of sense. I mean, as somebody who has studied business and economics and all these kind of things, he's absolutely right. Do you think there's any chance that we get closer to a solution like that now that we've seen the data on what hasn't worked? It's just more obvious.
You all are exactly on point, but the challenge is that's exactly where Obamacare realized they could start controlling the healthcare system if they controlled who got paid and how much they got paid. Thus, they had to make sure they controlled the insurance market first. Look, where the solutions and where reform has to happen is not for government to own and operate the healthcare system. It's to put up guardrails so to make sure that there's a level playing field, and to make sure there is a safety net that when someone needs help, they're able to get assistance with their health care, but not have government be the owner and operator. And if those are the reforms that Republicans put in place, Americans are going to be very happy with the results.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for your time. John.
Well, another brawl breaks out at a mall after several others across the country. Why police believe this one was coordinated on social media, and now several young people are facing charges. Our legal panel weighs in.
These teenagers, these juveniles were able to get on social media, specifically Snapchat, and they were able to all meet up at this location at the Philadelphia Mills Mall. But police were ready for them. They were proactive.
Now to a disturbing story we first told you about yesterday on Happening Now. 4 young people have been arrested for another mall fight last night. This one at the Mills Mall in Philadelphia. It comes after multiple incidents Monday across the country, and it appears this one was planned on social media. Rick Leventhal live in our New York newsroom with more. Rick.
John, it's hard to believe that organizing fights and mayhem in malls could actually be trending, but this appears to be the case with groups of teens coordinating disruptions on social media, and it didn't take long for police to catch on. The latest incident, as you mentioned, happened late yesterday in Northeast Philly. 300 to 400 juveniles arriving by bus at the Philadelphia Mills Mall, intent on wilding in the food court, according to cops who were waiting for them, tipped off to the plan by monitoring the mobile messaging app Snapchat. Police and mall security prevented most of the group from going inside, but as many as 90 of them did get in and started a ruckus. Some allegedly cursed and punched officers, who arrested 4 of them on multiple charges.
When they got in the food court area, that's when they began acting disorderly. They were running around, jumping on tables and chairs, yelling and screaming and just carrying on.
We just seen the cops flying from everywhere, and we just heard there was a flash mob. We tried to get in through JCPenney, but they already locked them all down.
There were at least a dozen mall melees Monday in the midst of huge crowds returning gifts or looking for post-holiday deals. In some cases, there were mass evacuations after false reports of gunfire. In Ohio, officers used pepper spray to disperse a disorderly group. And Fayetteville, North Carolina was one of many locations where ambulances were called for injuries to innocent bystanders. In almost every case, the offenders were teens, and police say social media could be the common thread used to at least loosely organize these events. John.
Rick Leventhal in our newsroom. Rick, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in our legal panel today. Emily Campagno, a former federal attorney and former criminal defense attorney. Nolan Klein is a defense attorney as well. Hats off, Emily, to the Philadelphia police. They got wind of this thing by monitoring Snapchat, apparently. When 200 kids show up on city buses, the police were able to prevent most of them from going into the mall. But I actually wondered whether that's even constitutional. Can police just say, hey, you're 17 and you're here with a horde, therefore you can't go in?
They can, and here's why. Because remember that these malls are private property. So absolutely, the owners and operators of the mall can restrict whatever laws that they need, including utilizing the police, to prevent criminal behavior, which the police can do on public property as well, if they have that sufficient notice that here they did on Snapchat. And the fact that all of these teens are facing charges, I'd like to point out a few that are interesting here. Number one, felony assault in the state of Pennsylvania does not require actual bodily injury. Fear of bodily injury is enough. And here, if an 18-year-old subjects a 12-year-old to fear of bodily injury, that ups the grading, i.e. the severity of the crime. Inciting a riot and participating in a riot can be as minimal as tumultuous behavior that substantially obstructs law enforcement's duties and or a rowdy, angry person in a crowd. So these charges sound a lot more dramatic than they actually can be here in reality, and that's what these teens are facing right now.
If this was organized on social media, Nolan, I just have to wonder whether the law is keeping up with the times. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, if you wanted to get 200 people to show up at an event and you had to make phone calls to 1,000 people to get 200 of them to show up, you wouldn't be able to do it. But social media allows it like that.
Right. I think that these kids may be out of school right now for the holidays, but a few of them are about to learn some hard lessons. And I would say that's particularly true of the one minor who reports are attempted to actually strike a police officer. And you're right. In times gone by, it may have been very difficult to round up a crowd of 200 people. And today it's easy on Snapchat and other mobile applications. Social media may be very easy to round up people. That doesn't make it any less of a crime to incite a riot, to attempt to whip up large numbers of people into a frenzy. And at least from the reports I've seen, it appears that that may be exactly what happened here. A concerted effort to whip up a frenzy in multiple locations, by the way. 12 locations over a 2-day period. Now, we don't yet have information tying these events together or putting any particular person behind or group of people behind the events. But certainly, right now, the circumstantial evidence seems to suggest that there is some connection, some tie, and this is not just happenstance in such a small 2-day period. And so certainly, certainly I would be looking to see if there are any connections are drawn between these events.
That's the point I was going to make, Emily. I mean, we've had this discussion now 2 days in a row because the day after Christmas, there were at least a dozen riots erupting at shopping malls in a dozen different states. You know, hats off to the police in this Philadelphia Mills case for at least stopping most of those kids from getting in. But what are the mall owners supposed to do? Could they sue Snapchat, for instance?
Well, that's a common discussion we've been having, right? Talking about the liability of these social media platforms for the content that is posted. And that's an ongoing issue. They absolutely can be sued, and it's up to them to defend and say, well, our disclaimer was ironclad enough. We deterred this kind of behavior. So we are hiding behind, for example, Section 230. We are not the posted content. That being said, the counter argument is, well, you're having an attractive nuisance. Obviously, these kids are going to use it in that way, or you actually do alter the content. You make it novel when you're using it in conjunction with advertisements for these youth. Note too that the fact of the internet that it crosses state borders elevates a lot of these charges to the federal component, which is something important to note. And secondly, remember, these mall owners, again, it's private property. They can shut their doors. So this can become something where in future malls, perhaps they will no longer attract brands that are alluring to teenagers or cease to renew contracts with those brands because they don't want this to keep happening.
Yeah, but you close your doors and then, you know, you're wrecking it for everybody else. Nolan, I'm surprised, frankly, that there was only one arrest, apparently, after this latest Philadelphia incident. Wouldn't the police be wise to, you know, throw a bunch of these punks in the paddy wagon and you know, let them spend the night in juvenile detention, or would they consider that a badge of honor, the punks?
Well, I can't speak to whether any of these punks would consider it a badge of honor to spend the night in the paddy wagon. But what I can say is that I would imagine that the police arrested everyone who they could charge with a crime. I don't know that all 200 of the kids who showed up last night committed a crime. Certainly I would imagine that people who destroyed property or were violent were arrested. I know it was only 4 people. We don't know all the facts yet. Let me say as well that I'm not so sure that Snapchat or any of these platforms could be held liable in this case. I think that, unfortunately for these business owners, since the people who created this mayhem probably are not worth suing, they have nothing, really their general liability insurance policies are going to be all that they're left to look to in this case. And it's really a shame that in this case of just gross incivility, at the end of the day, none of the people who actually committed these acts are probably going to be held liable in any significant way.
We'll have to leave it there and hope that it doesn't happen again tonight. Nolan Klein, Emily Campagna, thank you both.
Thank you.
Melissa.
Remembering a Hollywood legend, actress and writer Carrie Fisher dies suddenly at the age of 60. We know Fisher had a heart attack days ago, but how much do Americans really know about their own heart health? We are taking a closer look at heart disease and how it affects men and women differently.
John Kerry's lengthy speech on the Middle East. He's already denouncing it, saying it's biased against Israel, so you don't want to miss this. Plus, President-elect Donald Trump about to make a major economic announcement. We'll tell you what that one is about. And one state is about to make it illegal to even hold your cell phone while you're driving. Overkill or not? We'll explain on America's News Headquarters in just a few minutes.
Carrie Fisher passed away days after suffering a massive heart attack on a flight from London to Los Angeles. While some of the factors in her case remain unclear, of course, we know that heart disease is the leading cause of death in the U.S., taking more than 600,000 lives every year. Dr. Kevin Campbell is a cardiologist and the author of Women and Cardiovascular Disease, so you certainly know a lot about this. Let me ask you, you say it's more difficult to identify or to recognize in women. Some of the symptoms which surprised me, atypical symptoms, are nausea, back pain, flu-like illness, a feeling of dread. Tell me about that.
You know, you're exactly right. You know, men typically present with chest pain, shortness of breath, and, you know, very classic symptoms. Women may have very atypical symptoms, such as, like you mentioned, the nausea, the back pain. And, you know, it may get blown off by the emergency room physicians or the patient themselves as not being cardiac related. And so we see women really being undertreated and underserved.
So if you feel like you have a flu for a long period of time, you may actually have had or be having a heart attack. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is you really have to interpret symptoms in the context of risk. And what I really want all our viewers who are women to understand, what are the risk factors for heart disease? Diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, family history, obesity, and tobacco smoking. If you have these risk factors and are having atypical symptoms, you really need to reach out to your physician and get screened.
What are screening tests that are appropriate? Because if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I have some, but not the other, but now I'm nervous, what do you do? How do you get started?
You know, the first thing I would advise women to do is talk to their primary care doctor. Let them know what your symptoms are. Understand your risk. And if you do have significant risk factors, I would probably start with a stress test where we walk you on a treadmill with an EKG and look for abnormalities. And from there, if that test is positive or equivocal, we can move into more advanced testing.
We're seeing more of this now than before. Is that right? How come?
You know, I think what we've seen is we've really done a great job of raising awareness of heart disease in men. It's really thought to be a man's disease by the general public. We've got to do better now of treating women, because actually only about 50% of women realize that heart disease is their #1 health threat. So if we can educate and advocate and then do research for heart disease in women, we can make a difference in outcomes for women too.
People look at the case of Carrie Fisher, and obviously, you know, we don't know a lot of details about that, and, you know, it's still a period of time where people are so sad about her loss, and I don't want to diminish from that at all. But looking at this case, it reminds people about the risk. What are some other risks that are out there? Because she was very vocal about the fact and sharing, you know, that she had drug abuse problems in the past, that, you know, she was a victim of bipolar disorder, and she was open about that to try and help other people. But are those the kind of things that might create more risk?
You know, you're exactly right. Anytime you abuse substances, it does things that are negative to our health and our body. And it also is associated with other habits, maybe binge eating and drinking too much and other things like that. And it can have a negative impact on your cardiac health. One of the things I like to think about is Princess Leia from Star Wars was a symbol of hope. And I really think that Carrie Fisher would want to be hope for millions of American women who are out there that may have the same issues that she had with mental illness and with heart disease, and maybe inspire other women to take control of their own health.
Well, I would think she would certainly want that because she was such an advocate on the mental health front, really an inspiration. Dr. Kevin Campbell, thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me, Melissa.
So for more, check out foxnews.com for Dr. Campbell's opinion piece on women and heart disease. Go to opinion.foxnews.com, go to foxnews.com, click on the opinion tab. I tweeted it. You can find it there. It's a great piece. Check it out. John.
We are getting a first look at this year's crystal ball in Times Square that'll help us all count down to the new year. What makes it one of a kind for the celebration? It's our Final 30 next.